if you want to know what a strength coach at the highest level, working with elite athletes, what's that like? What's a day? What's a week like? And how you can integrate that into your clinical practice of strength and conditioning and programming for your athletes and your patients, this episode is perfect for you. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Welcome, all new listeners, and welcome back to those who have heard my content in the past. If you want to know what a strength coach at the highest level, working with elite athletes, what's that like? What's a day? What's a week like? And how you can integrate that into your clinical practice of strength and conditioning and programming for your athletes and your patients, this episode is perfect for you. Today, I have an amazing guest. Mr. Jamie Myers, who is a very notable strength and conditioning coach in the strength world, and he is currently a strength and conditioning coach at the United States Olympic Committee and Paralympic Committee, excuse me, at the Chula Vista Elite Athlete Training Center. I forget what it's called nowadays. So Jamie, I'm excited to have you on, and listeners, this is perfect for you if you're like, I want to develop a strength framework. I want to understand how they think, what do I need to do, and how to integrate that. This episode is going to be amazing. So, Jamie, first of all, thank you for coming on. And secondly, you look extra stacked and bulky and wide. So I'm appreciative of the size that you've put on. So thank you for being on. Tell me about yourself, Jamie. Just everything about your current position, your responsibilities. Tell me more about yourself.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate you saying how wide I am, because from my peak when we work together, I'm down like 10 pounds, 15 pounds, and being a meathead, that takes its mental toll on you sometimes. So I appreciate that.
Of course.
But yeah, like you said, I work for the United States Olympic Paralympic Committee. I've been there for almost 13 years now.
Yep.
I'm a senior strength and conditioning coach, and I work primarily with track and field athletes, the field events in particular. Do a little bit of work here and there with some archers and some BMX, but primarily track and field.
And so you've been there 13 years. I was there from 11 to 14.
Yeah.
So when was your actual first year? 2008,
2009.
09. So
Yeah.
you've had a lot of different medical professionals you worked with, a lot of coaches and everything else. So today, really, for the listeners out there, my real goal is to be able to learn how to integrate yourself with these individuals. And maybe you're not working professional sports. It doesn't matter. The principles are going to be the same. And Jamie and I used to work together, and we've collaborated on a lot of cases, and we've had a lot of success. And coming from a strength coach, I want to get their perspective on what it might be to have, a medical professional working with them in an ideal setting, how they can collaborate with coaches or medical professionals. So that's really the goal today. So Jamie, tell me, let's see here. You work with field events and a couple of things, BMX. So what does a strength coach do? What do you do? What does a week, a day look like? What do you do?
Yeah, it varies kind of from coach to coach and athlete to athlete. Okay. But in general, we help design weight training programs that fit within the overall periodization scheme of the athlete. Not just to get their squat up or their bench up. Right. Sometimes, yes, but that's not really the end goal. The end goal is to have them be better at their sport. So using the weight room to serve an assistant and in an assistance role to shot put, pole vault, BMX, etc. Some of them it's like shot put, obviously. I think everybody can see a direct correlation there. Get them big and strong helps a lot. Some of the other sports, the numbers aren't as high, and you don't pursue the squat movement, let's say, from a an output role necessarily. It can be somewhat of an output role if they're incredibly weak, but it's becomes sometimes more of a a resilience role, like a robustness role.
I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, what's interesting is I think most people think in their perception of a strength conditioning coach, specialist, whatever it is, they think that like your goal is to get numbers, right? Like as high as possible and get them as strong as possible. And sometimes that's not the case
Right.
because like you said, for archery,
Mhm.
is the goal to like get as strong and powerful as
No,
possible?
not at all. Not at all.
You
Like
laugh. I mean, but
coach would kill me.
so this is important for PTs to understand. It's strength is not always the focus. Like in our head, like it's the thing we go to. It's the only thing we go to. It's not like and flexibility, mobility, and everything
Yeah,
else. But when we think of strength and conditioning, obviously because it's in the name, strength and conditioning,
sure.
I think they think that okay, well, now I got them healthy. Now let's just get you strong. Let's add a couple pounds on you. Let's add some mass. But
Mhm.
their skill has nothing to do
Right.
with mass,
Yeah. I mean,
right?
remember Brady?
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
one of the best that's ever done it.
Never lifted.
Can't
Yeah,
get the guy
never
in the
lifted
weight
a
room.
weight in
Like
his
can't get him in.
life.
No,
Wait,
he
so
won't
this is
come in.
interesting story, guys. So we worked with an athlete who was, I don't know, two-time
Oh,
Olympian, gold medalist,
I can't
right?
keep count.
Yeah, whatever it was, right? And I don't know if he's still leading the pack, but the gentleman would not touch a weight, couldn't get him in the weight room, and he was still successful because some sports rely on skill, some rely on strength, power, acceleration, all the above. And just because they play a professional sport, it doesn't mean that you are just working on tendon development and developing power. Like that's not the thing. Jamie's role, and I don't want to speak for you, Jamie, but your role is to facilitate what their goal is, right? Like, I need to win a medal. Okay, cool. What does that look like over the next year? And you have to work with the coach, I imagine, like, hey,
Mhm.
how many tournaments? Where am I building? What's the goal for this phase? How do you how do you break out a year? Like, let's go with an athlete people might be familiar with. Can we do like maybe a shot put or
Mhm.
because I think BMX is a little challenging.
Yeah.
Can we talk about a common focus and then how do you start your framework?
I mean, the I don't really use the traditional like periodization terms
Yeah,
because it depends which book you read or who you talk to, right?
yeah,
But at the end of the day, you're just trying to control volume, intensity, etc., to set them up to be in a position to succeed, right?
yep,
But the basic idea that I've used with, let's say, shot put when I've gotten to work with some of those guys is, find out when the major meets are,
yep,
the things that really matter. And typically in America, that's USA's and World Championships or Olympics.
yes,
We rarely worry that much about Pan Am's, Diamond League meets, but that's
mm,
the professional circuit, right? We don't worry about that stuff a whole lot. Um, so generally starts, you work backwards from there. When you're going to start depends on when they finished
mm,
and what the coach wants. So
right,
an example of like a weird time where it wasn't like a very, standard, like, okay, we're going to start in October, was in 2019 when we had world championships in Doha in October.
yes. Oh, I
So,
understand. Yes,
so we had to, the year was longer. We might have to give them more time off,
yep,
stuff like that factors in. But once they take a little bit of time off, oftentimes that's more for mental than it is for physical.
mm,
I start them with some, real basic bodybuilding stuff. Usually during that time, they're working with our sports medicine department, hopefully to be getting some screenings and assessments. Um, just looking for, a baseline for return to play stuff, but also anything that might pop up that I miss or
yes,
that, the coach misses. But so bodybuilding, and during that time, I can watch them move and assess kind of where they're at. And then after that, we follow, I don't know if it's block or what it is, kind of steals from everything, right?
of
Like
course.
linear,
Yep,
all of it. But we ramp up slowly over time. Usually it's about a month per block. Um, you know, lower volume, or I'm sorry, higher volume, lower intensity,
yes,
and then transition,
yes,
Um, depending on the season and how things go, we might be able to do that twice before we start tapering. And again,
yep,
the taper can look different depending on how the coach views that. Some coaches like a 10-day taper. Some
huh,
coaches don't really taper at all, and you do like a, for lack of a better expression, like a longer taper that
interesting.
lasts maybe like a couple months.
Yeah,
And that's more from a case of like, I hate the term maintenance because it sounds so passive.
Yeah.
So we try to look at it from a standpoint of like stabilization.
Yes.
Kind of an idea we got from Dan Path.
Yep.
Right. Where we've built all this strength and power and all this like output.
Yep.
Well, let's not keep adding to it, because we need you to capture all of that in your technique.
Yes.
Right. And so that can, again, it depends on the year and the athlete and all that stuff and the coach, but maybe a month or two where we do that prior to, usually again in America, USA's, because typically you got to be top 3. Doesn't matter how good you've done the rest of the year. If you want to make the world championship or Olympic team, top 3. So we want to set them up to, you have to like peak for that.
Of course.
Right. And then you figure it out after that, depending on how much time you have. Because some years you have a lot of time, like the 2019 example I gave you.
Yep.
And this year, I think we have 2 or 3 weeks.
Interesting. So what people might not know is a typical track and field schedule. So if we put it in terms, the fall is typically, and I want to go back to your point of blocks and how you structure that. And obviously it depends on what time you have. So for everybody to understand, there's an off season, there's a preseason, and there's in season. A very easy way for most people to understand that. So if we talked about track and field, the off season, would you say is the late summer, fall?
I would say that's probably on average, maybe just early fall sometimes.
Yeah. And then the October, November, December, maybe that's preseason.
I don't even know if I'd give it that much time. A lot of the time, I mean, yes, it is.
Yes.
But in this environment, the athletes are practicing all the time.
That's interesting for some people to know, like that.
Right.
That's in professional football, there are times there's a good month where they're doing nothing, absolutely nothing. Right. They assume they went to Super Bowl in March, they're like crashing.
Right. Well, and I mean, we might give them a month.
Yeah.
But as soon as they come back, like even if they're doing the bodybuilding stuff and getting all their assessments done, they're still practicing.
I see.
Now it might not, it's certainly, I don't want to like, make it sound like we come out here and we're like, okay, go throw 22 meters. Right. But it's like, we start doing, sport practice.
And the intensity is low.
Very, very low.
Very low. And the volume is, the volume of sport specific training is still low.
Still low. And it kind of builds a little bit, so it's all the standard stuff. You know what I mean? Like we're not trying to build up, incredible workloads in a very short period of time. But they are coming out and like doing drills.
And is that more just for like nervous system, like just technical
skill acquisition at the end of the day? You know what I mean?
I understand. Which is what they're getting paid for, right?
Correct. Well, and you've got, some of these shot putters, they're so strong. Like, they're not like the ones that aren't throwing 22 meters or above, like some of the guys that we've worked with. It's not because they're not as strong. You know what I mean? Like they're just not able to capture their strength in the movement as well. Right.
Which is an interesting role for you then, because as a strength coach, what's my focus for this year then? Like they're already capping. I mean, you can get their bench higher, but there's a certain point, and this is not my world. Is there a certain point where a person's relative bench to body weight ratio or number or whatever it is kind of capped before that negatively impacts their performance?
The way that I've always looked at it, I really hate that, like, oh, you're strong enough or you're too strong. Like that's crazy to me. Right. The problem becomes a case of like your ability to recover.
I understand.
From the lifting and how that would negatively affect the sport practice. So it's not that like, oh, you bench, and this is going to sound crazy, but it's a real thing. It's not that you bench 600 pounds and that's too much weight to bench press.
Yes.
It's a case of how does that affect you from a recovery standpoint to set you up to be able to practice the next day.
So it's not lifting, it's not the amount or the, it's basically how is it integrated and impact your ability to train for a skill-based sport.
Right. Well, some of the guys that we've worked with have some of like they need a lot of time to recover. And then we've got other guys where like, it's unbelievable how fast they recover from some of these loads where you're like, he's going to be messed up. Like he's going to be messed up for a week, and he's fine in like a day and a half. Like,
interesting. So, a lot of people ask, like, how does, like, what qualities or traits does an Olympic or a elite athlete have? And there's numerous, right? There's,
certainly,
man, their nervous system, their strength, their power output. Now you're adding a different component that not a lot of people talk about: their ability to recover. Some can just recover fast.
It's crazy. Some of
in our world, at Sports Performance, we call it, anybody who's 18 and under has this youth juice, like they can just recover fast, right? But there's some people who can extend that into their professional career. Like it's like you're 25 still recovering like you're 18, or some like progression off of that. And it's true. You're like, how the rest of them can't recover that much. They can't bench 600 and practice the next day and still produce a good number or good output. And that separates them. That gap widens. So that's an interesting point you say, that like, it's not that they're not continuing to build strength. It's how does it impact their weekly schedule or their ability to perform the thing that they need to be good at.
Yeah. So that's more how I kind of try to figure out the athlete.
I get that.
Within the coach's sport program. And, I'm always working with the coach. It's not like the coach is doing a thing and he's like, this is what I'm doing. And you figure this out. And then I just go off and do my own thing. Like, every time, like I send all the programs I write to the coaches, I try to get them to them a week ahead of time from like when we're going to change, so that they can review them. We could talk about it if they think there's going to be a problem, or if they want to see something different based on what they're seeing at practice. So
okay, so this is interesting. You said that you're working with a coach constantly, right? So say for instance, let's go with let's go pro football, okay, and let's go off season March, maybe even April. And they usually have spring training, May, maybe June. They're off for a month, and they come back in August, or they're actually right at preseason, and they're going into August preseason, September through January. They're in season. Now, for you, if that was your environment, right now in the track and field world, you have this one mega annual planning, right? Like I imagine you're like, what does the year look like? How many tournaments do you have? Because you're not going to have just one full peak. I imagine there's some mini valleys in between, so they can have some meets in between preseason or in season for the ultimate goal of USAs, right? Like if that's the top peak, or worlds right after that. So you got to figure out where the top peak is, I imagine, and then you have these mini peaks so you can have performance updates and events. So when you have this, you obviously are going to map out what that looks like over the year. And that may change, I imagine, if they qualify, don't qualify, and heaven forbid they're hurt, right? And that changes the game. So that's why you're saying the coach doesn't tell you like, hey, go over here, you do that, I'll do this. It's because it's ever changing based on everybody has nagging aches and pains. It's like my Achilles is bugging me, my toe is bugging me, I have an ingrown toe. Like there's always something, and that affects, well, like coach says, I can't do it here. I mean, you can't stop, right? Like your role never stops. It's just like, what am I being dealt with? Is what you're like, I saw the plan, but what are you throwing at me now?
Right.
And so that's why when you get a plan, there's going to be ever changing elements of that.
Yeah. You just try to be flexible, right? Like
that's your goal, right?
Yeah. And I don't think it's that hard. Sometimes people make these like beautiful yet rigid plans. And I've never really done that. Not that I'm perfect, just like that's not how my brain works. It's more like I have a template and a thought process for kind of where I want to go, but like it's very general. You know what I mean? And it makes it easy to adapt based on what coach sees, what I see, what I'm getting from sports med, what the athletes say. Like, so all the feedback that we get, it just, for me, it makes it easier to kind of adjust on the fly. And I mean, like I've learned, I think, better ways to do that over my time here. just because like with all things, you're in the same environment for a long time, you kind of get the flow of things. And so you have an idea, so it's, some of it's just like never, or I shouldn't say never, but trying, generally speaking, not to give so much from my end that they're going to have bad practice. And, like if they get into a Diamond League meet, because sometimes that happens and you don't know, and that's how they make most of their money.
Of course.
And it's like in a week, they're like, oh, hey, next week I got to go to Doha for a Diamond League meet.
Right. Changes the game. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you're like, oh, okay, well, all right, no problem. And it's like, I don't make huge changes then.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just like, oh, let's cut a set, or, don't work, like take a day or two off, or, whatever. And then when you get there, do this to kind of wake your body up, so to speak. So it doesn't have to be like, oh, okay, well, now we've got to put in a whole new block for this 1 week of training. You can just kind of tweak it a little bit so that they are maybe a little bit more rested or recovered than you had initially planned.
Yes.
Or take a day out, just give them like a small rest bump. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. It doesn't have to be super convoluted and,
Yeah. Is
all
it
that.
linear, undulating? I mean, what do you, I understand. Okay. So, which is interesting because I imagine a lot of the listeners in here, like they might be following some strength coaches, and like they're following the best of the best, and their programs are the best because they've worked with pro athletes. And the more I grow professionally, the more I understand master clinicians or master in anything is they've got a little bit of wiggle room and flexibility that they are able to adapt regardless of like, if, okay, cool, you got 3 Diamond Leagues, didn't see that coming, let's go. Like, and you can just turn the dials a little bit, right? You're just willing to adapt to that because you've seen it so many times that maybe the first times you, as a young strength coach, you're like, oh, it's going to mess up everything. I can't believe it. And they actually do well. And you're like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Or you messed them up and you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have stayed the course. You didn't tweak volume, intensity. You say the same thing. You're like, oh, let's just try it. You messed them up, right? So somewhere in that world, you've adjusted that. So you're turning the dials constantly on people. Can you tell me, what are the big changes that you do? Do you, and this is probably like based on seasons and where they are, do you change the volume of exercise first? Intensity? Are you more willing to throw a rest day? How do you make your adjustments? Like, what's your algorithm in your head?
For something like a Diamond League meet? Or just like throughout the season?
Throughout the season. Like, how are you changing people's variables based on a strength coach looking at performance towards a goal, and something happens, they tweak something? Let's go with injury. How about that? Let's go with injury.
It depends on the severity of the injury. Depends on what type of kind of restrictions, so to speak, I get from sports med in regards to the injury. But I generally try to keep things as close to what we have on paper in that, that one block that we wrote as possible, oftentimes for the mental aspect more so than anything else.
They're staying the course.
Right. So we try to do as much as we can that was the original plan, and then tweak as needed. And so sometimes that's intensity, sometimes it's volume, sometimes it's the exercises. Like I don't really, it's kind of a case by case basis depending on what I'm presented with and the athlete, and sometimes it's their personality too.
Interesting.
Will help inform some of my decisions. People that are pretty chill, it's easier to be like, yeah, man, no, just forget about it. Like it's not a big deal. And then some of the people that you and I have worked with are more like, no, I gotta keep going. Like,
I get that.
Everything's gonna be ruined if I can't do this.
For sure.
It's like, well, that's not true, but let's try to keep you as close to that, whatever that may be, as possible.
I think it's really hard for young professionals to hear that. I think anybody who's listening, I have a lot of type A's, OCD people who listen to my podcast. Why? Because I'm that way. And so I over the last 2 years, I've probably have become less rigid in my personal life and my professional life. And it's only because my OCD got me to a certain point in my career. And I kind of capped out. I was like, I feel like I'm hitting a wall, like I'm not getting to the next level. And once I added that wiggle room of like, all right, let's just adapt a little bit more. It's just like it allowed me more opportunities, better, but like the advantages are being flexible so much. And actually, my wife has been a big component of that. She's like, ease up, relax, man. So, and so, you know, you're saying that naturally, I think that's part of your personality and the way you manage people based on maybe your experiences or who you are. So, as a young professional, that's hard to hear, right? That it depends on the person, the season, everything else, because they're trying to create an outline. They're trying to create an algorithm as a new clinician on my side, as a new clinician. They're trying to learn the strength conditioning principles and how to be able to work with somebody. And when you tell them it depends, and you like, that's really hard for them to hear. So I try and create a little bit of structure for them and then have some wiggle room on the back end. Now, let's go back to the way you outline a year. You said you go in blocks. Now, are
Typically.
you doing like, and give me some structure here, Jimmy. Are you doing like 3 or 4 mesocycles with a couple microcycles in there? How do you frame this? Give me something.
Yeah, see, again, that microcycles typically a week, right?
Yes.
Mesocycle can be a month.
Sure.
It can be a couple months.
Yes.
So I guess the way that I do it is I typically do like a 3 to 4 week program.
Okay.
Right. And there's slight progression within that program. And
Okay.
that third or fourth week is a down week.
Okay.
Right. So very simple example. Let's say we're doing 4 sets of 4 on a power clean.
Yes.
At 70 to 75%. Week
Yes.
1, 70%.
Yes.
Week 2, 72.5%.
Yes.
Week 3, 75%.
Got it.
Week 4 is a deload week, and the deload weeks, like for me, it's become very much like the more time I spend with the athlete, the easier it is for me to like tell them what to do on that day for the deload week.
Okay.
Is, you know, how much I want them to deload or whatever. So that varies how beat up they are, whatever.
Sure.
And then I do another program after that maybe I'm going to go 80 to 85% on the power clean. Same idea. Week 1, 80, week 2, week 3, deload week. So I'll kind of go that way, get them up into 90%. Usually that's in like December or January, depending on when we start.
Okay.
And then go back, not to the bodybuilding, but to like a 60 to 65%. And I'll change the exercises that we're progressing on at that point. So like the first maybe mesocycle or whatever macro cycle would be power cleans.
Yeah.
Right. And we're going to progress power cleans up to hopefully 90%. I don't really do a traditional max or a true max. It's like within that 90% block.
Yep.
If we're feeling good one day, go ahead. You know what I mean? We'll just like work it into the workout.
If it makes sense and they don't have a competition and it's not risky. Right. Yes, I understand. I get that.
You know, and it's pretty easy to project out maxes, you know, like true maxes. Within that, like, so I don't really worry about that. And some people it's more important, whatever. But and then after that, we switch exercises and then we have a progression and we'll go hopefully to get to, 85. Maybe we'll get to 90 again. We don't always, just kind of depends on how the season goes.
Yes.
But then once we start getting into that like month or 2, sometimes 3, depending on the group, before USAs, I start flat loading them and swapping exercises more often. So that's when we're into that stabilization or maintenance, whatever.
Just keep them.
Yeah. So like, we're still making them train and in a way where they don't feel like it's, passive or whatever, or like they're getting weaker. But the goal isn't to build a bunch of strength anymore, or output, some type of output activity. The goal is to like give you a load that allows you to still feel like you're training and know where your body is in space, because you've got to remember they practiced all year long under load. So to remove the load all of a
Right.
sudden, then they're like, well, where am I? Right.
I
Like
see.
their body feels different
Free
from
floating.
a technical standpoint.
Yep.
So trying to figure out what that appropriate load is and then give them time to capture whatever we've built over the season.
So when you're flat loading or maybe in season or even flat loading right before an event when you're trying to stabilize, what percents are you typically at?
Probably somewhere between, it depends on the lift, but typically going to be from like 70 to not more than 85.
Interesting.
Usually, and then like the
high.
volume.
Yeah.
Well, on something like a bench press, I'm willing to go a little bit heavier because it's easier to recover from than a power clean.
Yes.
But like if we're doing 85%, it'd maybe be for a single.
I see.
Like you do like 2 or 3 singles at 85%, maybe 5, depending on how trained they are and all that stuff. But like 5 singles at 85%, if you're, we take the charts, 85%, that's your 5 RM. I mean, come on, 5 singles. That's like
shouldn't be a problem.
Not taxing at all. And they're in shape for that stuff because they've done
all year. Yeah.
5 sets of 3 at 85%.
Yep. And give me your main lifts. Obviously, per sport changes. So I like, let's go track and field. Let's go field events because that's what we've been talking about. What are your main lifts and why?
Probably the main ones are all the standard ones that people would imagine: squat, bench, clean, snatch. Sometimes some jerks or push presses, but like variations upon those movements.
Of course.
So I don't care. Like there's athletes that for whatever reason, I think they look terrible using a straight bar, doing a back squat. Right?
I get that. Yep. And
I could bang my head against the wall, breaking them down, trying to make them look perfect. Or I could give them the safety squat bar and not that Hatfield stuff, right? Where they're holding on using their arms, like an actual safety squat bar, hands on the handles.
Right.
And it's like that hybrid between a front squat and a back squat, and it makes them look better. And I don't care. Yeah. Because the goal is not to get you good at a traditional barbell back squat. The goal is to use the squat to train your legs, make sure the hips are working correctly, core, all the blah, 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 all the stuff that we all know squats do for us.
Yeah.
So that I will change it. I've had kids for whatever reason, box squats were the answer.
Great.
Free squats.
Great.
Terrible. They'd get all messed up. Box squats, we could train consistently. So it's that consistency that I'm always seeking, because I don't want these like, the Tim Gavitt with, you got the big ups and downs and training loads and the breaks, and that messes everything up both physically and technically. And usually in our world, I'm not as worried about the physical because I feel like we can handle that pretty easily. I'm more worried about the technical. I don't want breaks from technical practice.
And if you listeners, if you understand, Jamie practices very much my style of his craft. I'm kind of what makes sense for the athlete. The practical components of what he's saying is the most important. Your job is to provide a stimulus to help facilitate whatever the skill or the career is, right? You're there to provide the stimulus to help support them achieve a goal. You're not there to strengthen. If strengthening happens to be the stimulus that they need during that season or in that phase, then it makes sense. But why force perfection when they're not a professional weightlifter? They're not a professional Olympic lifter. Now, if you're dealing with Olympic weightlifting, that's a different story, completely different story. And this is a debate that I have with a lot of clinicians, and I've seen strength coaches have this debate as well. Do you really work on the technical side? Do you focus on the technical side? And maybe off season, sure, I don't know, but maybe in season, you've already established, why waste time? Find the stimulus that works for them. And if it's a different grip or a different bar or a dumbbell instead of a bar because their back gets tweaked with the barbell, who cares? The stimulus is what you need, right? What is the goal? The goal of the exercise is provide a stimulus so that they are on track. So what Jamie is saying is everything in line with what we talk about. It's like whatever is practical for them. Your role is not to just relieve their pain. Your goal is to get them to the thing that they want to be able to do. Forget the knee pain. Forget it. Who cares about the knee pain? Their goal behind that is, can I get back on the track, please? And we get so obsessed about like what's not perfect, like there's still a little bit of bad mechanics. Who cares? Get them on the track, get them doing, a safety bar squat, and they gotta just get on that track. We don't have a job without them on the track.
That's right.
We fail to realize if they're not on the track, we don't have a job. And I think we get so obsessed with the nuances about our professional development that we lose sight of like what the heck we're doing for people. And those people are the reason we have payments. That's the reason why we have jobs. So I really appreciate that. Now, do you, this is something that clinicians should know as well. Do you, from a strength and conditioning standpoint, if somebody is not an Olympic weightlifter, not a weightlifting specialist, so they have a career or job or an elite athlete, or they're a recreational athlete and their goal is to get back to soccer, football, whatever it is, do you use your main lifts? So let's talk about at least some of the Olympic weightlifting. Do you use them from the ground position, an elevated position like a hang, and then do you ever do full like clean snatches if that's not their like, would you ever like do a full snatch on a triple jumper on a like shot putter?
I don't ever worry about, I typically have them catch in the power position.
Makes sense.
Right. Some of them, if for whatever reason they are proficient enough and confident enough and all that to like go get underneath the bar when we're going real heavy, assuming it looks okay.
Yep. I'm
not going to stop them, but I'm not, when we're doing, 60%, like, no, catch it in a power position. Like I don't need to worry about that. And it's, I also, pull from the floor, pull from blocks, pull from the hang, pull from the hip, kind of, that gets into the kid's body. Sometimes it's a case of like, we're in that flat loading period where I'm swapping exercises more often.
Yep. So you need the variation.
Yeah. So, a little bit of everything. Sometimes like one day we're pulling from the floor, the other day we're pulling from a block, sometimes just from the blocks. Like some of those throwers, they're great, big, strong guys, but all that loading they've done over the years, their backs don't do real great.
I get that.
With pulling from the floor. So it's better to pull from a box, and we can, kind of to the previous point we were making, we go to comfortable and familiar exercises, right? And it's fine to start there. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, the meat within your body is just receiving impulses, right? And it's just creating force. It doesn't know, oh, I did a safety squat bar squat or a straight bar squat, or I didn't catch this power clean, right? I just did a high pull. Like, it doesn't know. It knows you made force, right? And through a certain range of motion. That's all it knows. So who cares at the end of the day? Step up, squats, I don't care. Leg press gets bastardized. Look, so one of the greatest triple jumpers that's ever lived, that you and I have both worked with, that guy leg presses, right? You tell me it's a bad idea? Get out of here.
It's really hard.
Out of here. And also, one of the greatest 800-meter runners who's ever lived, that you and I have both worked with. He's a coach now, but somebody once said to him, and keep in mind, listeners, still like a top 5 800 time ever. Imagine how much faster you would have run if you had done power cleans. The ignorance in that statement is just shocking. He probably would have got hurt. Second of all, that was so incredibly fast, and is still so incredibly fast to run a 141. I believe it was 141.7.
Nasty.
800. That's insane. Insane.
Yeah. And it's hard, very, like, hindsight's 2020. And as a medical professional, you're dealing with injuries, and you can easily blame it on the strength coach, on the technical coach, on oh, you shouldn't have been lifting during this block. I mean, as a medical professional, we always, I don't know why, but we always like to point fingers. We're like, well, like, they shouldn't have done this. The coach shouldn't have done this. You shouldn't have been doing repeats. It's like too early in the season. You shouldn't have been doing hills. That's why your Achilles have flared up right before the season. I mean, no matter what, right? So some of the stuff is preventable, some is not, but it's really hard to know what the main stimulus was. We're just trying to find an answer to get them back to sport. Like that's like, no matter what, the goal is shut up and figure it out. That's really what it comes down to. I don't, at this point in my career, I don't want to hear about what I would have done. It's like, we have this athlete directly in front of me, and now I got to figure out with this strength coach what the damn solution is, because if I can do that, that athlete loves me, that coach loves me, the strength coach loves me, and everybody wins. Everybody wins. And so I'm always trying to find those solutions, and it's hard because people pose those questions. Chris, what would you do on this? Adrian Peterson went back in it's 6 months or 9 months after an ACL. Would you have done that? I don't know. Like, I don't know what his recovery was like, his ability to recover like a 22-year-old or an 18-year-old, or maybe he was doing a lot of leg press. I don't know why, but I don't know the scenario. And I'm not being paid millions to be on TV. So the stimulus is what I need to get to be able to provide them that next resource to get there. So I appreciate that. So now I have an understanding of where you go. So basically you're higher volume, lower intensity early in the season, or getting into season, preseason-ish. You're going to have your stimulus. You're going to basically go 3 weeks, one deload week, and you're going to continue to increase their percentages to a certain point, maybe before an event. And then in season, you're typically not going too high of intensity percentage wise. And even when you hold them, you're still at the top end, 80-85%. Okay, that makes total sense to me. So ultimately, you're just trying to build this block. Now, what we haven't talked about is mass. So some of these individuals lose weight in season. Is that correct?
Sometimes.
Yeah. What do you do with that? Because that is a direct variable.
Sometimes they want to.
So we're talking about field events.
Faster, right?
I see. Interesting. So there are some people who you don't want to lose weight, and some maybe you do.
Well,
as long
and
as
even
their technical side is there.
Even some of the throwers, right? Where all that mass is important, but you've got to accept certain realities within the travel and you know, like the foods. You're in
for sure
Europe somewhere. It's not necessarily as easy to eat the way you do when you're at home, and you're traveling. You're on planes. You know, here's a plane meal, like you know. So you kind of sometimes they get to a certain weight and then they want to kind of like slowly bring it back. Not just like let it free fall, right? You know, there's a kind of a barometer that most of them have that they don't want to get below, but you know, so it's just it's that goes to what does coach want, what does the athlete want, what are we seeing performance wise, and then you know, depending on what the support is from nutrition or the sport dietetics and all them, we can get information about like, you know, girth and body fat and, you know, muscle mass and that stuff. And like, have we lost weight and put on fat? Well, that's a problem.
Right?
Proportion.
Yep.
But if we've lost weight and, you know, girth comes down a little bit, skin folds go down, performance is good, good enough, right? Let's I mean, maybe pay attention to it, but we don't need to panic. So and then just so throughout the course, that building process, sometimes they do gain weight, like the jumpers might gain a little bit of weight. We just got to be careful with how much they gain,
right?
And then you know, their lifting volume comes down a lot more than a thrower's would, so and they're running, so it's not as hard to get that weight off.
So for those individuals, I imagine, are you still doing your same base fundamental lifts in season?
Yeah, we get a little bit more creative with the jumpers than the throwers. Sometimes that's, you know, special strength training. It's all good. It's fine. It's not a huge component. I haven't ever bothered to like calculate what percentage of special strength exercises we use versus traditional exercises. But I wouldn't imagine it's more than about 30%.
I see.
And then even with, but sometimes it's to keep them engaged. That group as a whole is not as interested in moving bars as throwers are. I mean, it's okay. And that's totally fine. But so it can help to keep the engagement. And you know.
I see. So you got to get a little more creative. Single leg work, split work. Maybe you're not on the barbell so much. You're doing a little bit more dumbbell work.
I don't know if you remember some of those exercises where we'd come off the platform and climb, you know, like almost run up a bunch of boxes, like you know.
Yeah, so I get that. So it's special strength. So you're adapting it to their sport. I completely get that. So then there's a couple of variables, but ultimately what you said just kind of like maybe reminded myself like, we're all part of this equation, and some people like to use it as like a Venn diagram, right? Like maybe the athletes in the center, and you have all these clinicians and everything else, or specialists working with this individual. But ultimately, it's kind of like a triangle, because I think that you can't lose sight of what the top of the triangle, which is like a skill, like achieving a goal. For that athlete, it's to win a medal. And then you have to work down. Most people think well, we're working together to keep the athlete healthy. No, no, no. Like, what is their goal? What is at the top of that goal? So it's to win USAs. Great. Coach, what are we doing this year? There has to be somebody captaining the whole darn thing. And then there's strength conditioning, which is supporting what needs to happen along a year to make sure that's great. And medical underneath that saying, hey, on the preseason, here's some identifiers for like what can be problematic that might impact strength, and tell the coach, you know what, they've gained 10 pounds over the summer. Nutrition is part of that as well. That their movement quality looks really bad. They have bad hips this week. Their ankles are stiff as heck and they cannot move. And the coach is like, whoa, that's going to change. So then, maybe do we need to back off and work with strength less or decrease your volume? And all we need to do is figure out, you're not trying to mobilize somebody or get them strong. You're trying to get them to a point where they win USAs. And I think as a medical professional, when you're on an island, you forget that, because we just get the small piece of the puzzle. I have knee pain and I can't run, and I want to fix a knee pain. You're 100%. And then they go out into the wild and you're like, well, I hope, figure it out.
Yeah.
And it's the truth, Jamie. Like, you might see it. Like, I've seen it. Like, I've been very fortunate to have a cool position to work with people like you. And this is the purpose of my podcast, to share it with people. And like, you're not on an island. There's actually people who want to work with you. There's strength coaches out on this planet. They might call themselves personal trainers, athletic performance coaches. I don't care what the label is. They're trying to develop somebody's performance. And maybe they don't have a coach. They don't have a technical coach. Maybe they just have the strength coach, and that's fine. That's their budget. But you are now the medical professional trying to figure out what the goal is. The goal is not to get rid of their knee pain and then hopefully the personal trainer or whatever it is figures it out. It's to figure out how you can work together to figure out how to get them to that goal. And so for you, working with medical professionals, you work with a lot. And we're talking about medical professionals because that's the audience that we have here. Now, in an ideal setting, how would you collaborate? Start a year. How would you see an ideal setting where you are collaborating with a medical professional to help an athlete achieve a goal? Tell me, like, dream.
My ideal situation would be where we get the kid in, the athlete in, before any training starts. We can do all the assessment. I mean, some of the assessments I don't care about, but I understand their value. They don't really help me in my job, but I understand their value. So like all of the assessments that we feel are necessary, whether it's me, the coach, sports med, we've always got the political organizations that are telling us what to do, all of it, right?
Part of it. Love it.
Get that all done right away before anything happens, right? Because a lot of times they come in and they're already training. Because the coach, like, we've got a limited amount of time. We got to get going. Sometimes they come in, we're not doing assessments till December, right? And I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus. It's just like,
that's late.
It's staffing and timing and all the stuff. So I'm not picking on anybody. I want that to be clear, right? But it's just in an ideal setting. They come in, they do that stuff. Now, within those assessments, I'm not so interested in some of those jump tests and stuff like that on force plates during that period of time, because I think that a lot of times they're coming from doing nothing. And they can get hurt in the assessment. Well, that's dumb, right? That's totally stupid.
For sure.
So like some of that stuff can be done after that initial maybe block, maybe during that deload week or whatever, right? Where like, okay, we kind of got in shape to train again. Now let's do some of those, for lack of a better expression, higher intensity performance tests that are clinical based, or, use force plates or NOR boards or whatever. And then that information is distilled down in readable form, because we've all gotten the forms sometimes. It's like that thick for one, like 2 inches thick for one kid. Like I don't have time to look at this. Where's the cliff notes? And we use that to create warm-ups
Love that.
In my opinion, that would be the ideal way to kind of go about it, at least
Right.
to start the process, because you look at a typical dynamic warm up in a track and field program, there's a lot of crossover between stuff that a strength coach is going to do for a warm up and that a PT or an ATC is going to do for rehab stuff. So why not, like, these are the things we've identified. Right. These are the things we want to do. We've done it a little bit. We're working on making that happen. Right. And I like the idea of it. It hasn't quite come to fruition yet, but we can do sport practice. Coach can warm them up the way they want. Coach can integrate that stuff as they see fit. But the warm up for the weight room, because typically practice, lunch, little break, then they come lift weights.
Yes.
The warm up for the weight room, 15 minutes maybe.
Sure.
Of some of that stuff.
Yep.
So that we've addressed a lot of the imbalances and inefficiencies that they may have. And then we go lift weights. So they're not doing a bunch of random crap that I want them to do to, like, get warm to squat, and maybe you do some of that stuff at the beginning that is lower body based, hip based, core based on lower body days. And then on, maybe you do some of the mobility and all that stuff afterwards. But, like, if we could use the assessments to create warm-ups and cool downs just to make the training day more efficient, so the kid doesn't have to then, I'm done lifting, now I got to go over to sports med for an hour. And just
now it's negatively impacting the recovery.
Well, they don't want to do it.
Much
they've
work,
been they've probably practiced for 3 hours, and then they come to me and I try to keep the lifts not more than 90 minutes. So probably, depending on the sport, 45 to 90 minutes.
Right.
But that's already, you're looking at 4 hours of training. You're tired. Like, if you're going to sports med at that point, you want a damn massage, right?
Right. And gosh, so anybody who's ever taken a course from me, listen to this darn podcast, worked with me, worked at Sports Performance, understands I love simplicity. I generally don't give more than 1 to 2 exercises. If it's a new, like, ailment, something happens, like 1 or 2 exercises, and try and integrate it into their daily life versus, like, make it a thing. You're gonna now designate 15 to 20 minutes of your life, which nobody wants to and nobody will do, right? So how do I seamlessly add it in? I don't know. Figure it out. What do you do at the gym? Add it to your warm up. Can you do it in between sets? Don't make it a thing. And if you've ever listened to me and asked, why do I do that? It's because of this framework. Listening and doing this with strength coaches and coaches are like, they're just tired. The reason why they don't do it is because they're exhausted. Why would I negatively impact their day? Then they have this view of sports med as the barrier to their success. I want to be able to help seamlessly integrate my world into theirs. So ultimately, I just need to be able to say what Jamie said, just throw it into the warm up, throw it into the cool down, don't add more, keep it simple. I really appreciate that. So that's like a preseason, determine that. And then what about in season? There's flare-ups all the time, right? Like, they're getting maintenance work, so they're getting massage, maybe acu or PT, whatever it is. That's, like, you imagine that's just part of the base of the pyramid. There's normally recovering. When they get flared up, in an ideal setting, how would that look like to set you up for success? Besides just letting you know. That step 1, let you know.
Sure.
Let the athlete be the communication.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully within that process, we've got, some type of, like, progressions worked into the warm up and cool down activities.
Yes. Yep.
And then there's the sports med. In my ideal world, the sports med practitioners would be hanging out.
Yes.
In the weight room for those periods of time.
Appreciate that.
Not all the time.
Yep.
Right. That's not realistic.
Get that.
But it's just like checking in at practice, the same type of idea. Like, I try to check in at practice. I don't get down there as often as I should, but I try to get down there. Checking in with sports med, same thing. I'm not over there as often as I should be, but trying to, like, just check in with the athletes, the coaches, the staff, etc. Being around, doesn't have to be all the time, come in, make sure they're doing it right.
Right.
And if at the beginning of a new block, they have a new warm up, well, then you're there to help implement the new warm up and the cool down. And then you can see them move under load too, which is very different than watching them overhead squat with a PVC pipe.
Of course.
I'm not saying that that's a bad thing to assess someone on. I actually think it's a good thing to assess someone on. But squatting 600 pounds, benching 600 pounds will tell you more about their movement abilities.
Yeah.
You know, and what things like when they're really trying, how do they compensate? You know?
Well, and you brought up an interesting point. So you're saying test them before preseason, see what their baseline looks like. Don't do the super aggressive stuff too early. Assess them, move into the new block, and reassess. Most people would just do a test one time per year and wait for them to get hurt and just get maintenance. But if we retest them every 3 months or every block, that gives you a point of where their point of failure is getting close to. So you know what a baseline is. What we don't typically do as a medical profession is we don't typically do interval-based reassessments. Why? Because we're a pain-based, injury-based profession. So we actually are negative. We have to wait for people to get hurt to see us. You see people when they're not hurt and hurt. So that's a normal expectation. You're like, doesn't matter to me. I'm still testing to make sure your goals hit. In our world, we're like, we let them float like birds, like have fun, and we never expect to see them back. Where if we have regular interval testing, that would help you reassess the warm up, the cool down, everything else.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. Okay,
and I think it's it does, again, it doesn't need to be like every 2 weeks or something like that. You know what I mean? But like, and just being around, I think helps everybody's communication. You know,
being present. I get that.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I always liked with you when we worked together, you'd be like, hey, so-and-so's got this happening. We can't do this. I'd say, all right, cool.
Done.
What about this? And you'd go, damn it. Okay.
Yeah. You know, and I would say, you know, I love my craft. I love the athletes. I love the people. And I think that some people love their profession. I love people, which I happen to work with in my profession. And for me, the person's at the center of that. And so I actually care. And the problem is we get so tangled professionally to try and like conquer this mountain, achieve something, get a role that you've never had before. And I think that happens organically if you just like work on the person and you support the people around you. Like that happens. People push you and they're like, dude, this person needs to be at that role or whatever it is. And I think the athletes will push you. And that's always been my belief. And that's why I think the communication component seems so foreign to people, but it's so basic from a humanitarian standpoint. Like, why don't you just talk to them? Why don't you ask them? Be present, ask them. So for those listening, I think that's important for you to consider. Maybe not big news, but very relevant news. You're talking about somebody who works in the elite strength coach world, saying the same fundamentals. Listen, talk to me, be present. Let me know where you're in, regular check-ins, and that's all I need. And that's going to create success more than any freaking program that you do that's built on an Excel spreadsheet that took you 5 hours. That's going to be irrelevant when that person gets injured or they change their mind and they're not going to go to that event. You're like, well, I wasted all that time. Great. That's a learning lesson.
Yep.
So I appreciate that, Jamie. So I have one more question for you, and I appreciate your time. What advice do you have for sports PTs who want to improve their skills in program design and collaborating with coaches? Like this seems like a very like robust question. They're like, oh, wait, what would you say to somebody, a sports PT, not a strength coach, a sports PT? We're never going to be a strength coach because you can't have like fun. You can't be the best in two crafts. It's very hard. Like it's not possible. So a sports PT who happens to want to have an interest more in strength conditioning, how would you say, like, where would you push them? Like, how do you improve your skills in program design and collaborating with people?
I'm going to assume within this that they're aware of the NSCA, National Strength and Conditioning Association.
That's correct.
They've, looked at the essentials of strength and conditioning textbook to get the very basic kind of, I guess for lack of a better expression, the American, viewpoint. And that's a fantastic starting point.
Yes.
Right. And, that's very important. I think you should do that. If you can take the CSCS and pass it, that helps a lot.
Beautiful.
Just demonstrate a base level of proficiency. After that, my advice would be to pursue something that works but is different, right? From a periodization standpoint. So like when I have interns and things like that, I try to encourage them to pursue the Dr. Bondarchuk periodization method, not necessarily because I think it's this amazing method that like everybody should be using, but it clearly works or has worked, right? Nothing works all the time, but it's very different.
Mm.
And if you can figure out that program and kind of like why it works, it opens your horizons to, I would just say, flexibility in programming. For me, and a good guy for people who want to like try to understand it, because all like the stuff that Dr. B has written in his books, a lot of them are like directly translated word for word, like from Russian to English. So the sentence structure is crazy.
Right.
Dr. Derek Evely.
Okay.
He's got, there's podcasts and all kinds of stuff out there for people to look up, but look up some of his stuff where he explains it. He explains it in a very consumable way that the North American mind can kind of handle, so to speak. Sure. But you were talking about a pyramid. Dr. B thinks about it like a pyramid. So at the very top of the pyramid, and this is in regards to training, we've got the competitive exercise.
Yeah.
Right. And it's small. Like it's the most important, but it's also the smallest block on the pyramid because it's the competitive exercise. How many variations of the competitive exercise?
Just do it.
There, right. And then you've got special development exercises, which are, right underneath it. There's a larger variety of exercises, but still not a whole lot, because that, like, if we're talking about shot put, maybe that's changing the weight of the implement, doing a stand throw, or things like that. So you're still kind of like in the sport practice realm. We can call it drills. Then you get into special prep exercises, which is, again, that's like the third tier of the 4-tier pyramid, and it is it's a little bit wider. There's more exercises to choose from. And then it's not as important that it simulates the same speed or motor pattern, but it's going to use a lot of the same muscles.
I see.
So like since we're using shot put as an example, squat, bench press, power clean,
makes sense,
push jerks, things like that. And then underneath that, you've got your general preparatory exercises, which is, that's sky's the limit, right? For some of that stuff. But it just, it's a very similar concept to what you were talking about with the pyramid and how you prioritize things and how you think about things and what's the end goal. The end goal is that competitive event or competitive exercise. And then you kind of work backwards from there.
So those are good starting points for, like, we're not here to, we're not going to be in a college like weight room setting helping the strength coach program design. We're not here to do that.
Right.
All we want to do is have, a lot of times we have athletes or patients that like are willing to go into injury prevention. So say we get them out of pain, and instead of just letting them fly, some of them were like, can you just guide me? And so, maybe they don't have a strength coach in there. Maybe they have a rural area. Or maybe they don't have somebody, they don't trust anybody because they just had knee surgery and they need to take it to the next step. And they have a soccer coach and there's no gap. There's a large gap, but nobody fill it. And so sometimes we have an opportunity, but it has to be in the athlete's best interest and safe and actually purposeful. And so a lot of times we're like, well, let's just apply the rehab principles and add some fancy soccer drills. And like, that's normal, like strength conditioning for the PT. They're like, I'm going to do rehab exercises with a little bit of fancy sports specific drills.
And don't worry about sports specific stuff.
Yeah, correct. That's not our job. That's like not our job. And ultimately, that's a big principle that you got to realize. It's not your job. You're not the technical coach. You're not the sport coach. It's not your job. So stop pretending to be, and don't think that that's strength conditioning. That is not agility training. That is not conditioning. It is sport specific. That is not your role. Your role here is to help guide them from a structural standpoint. And typically we're using bones, muscles, tendons to, like, that's what we're recuperating. But what happens is we're not used to aerobic, anaerobic development, nervous system development. That's not what we've worked on. We've always been in this like bone, tendon, ligament, structural, like let's repair it, but never to use it. And that's the new gap that we're trying to help support, not become experts, but just how to like organize that into a fashion. So I think that's really good. I think I've always been a big proponent of CSCS, not because it's like the gold standard. I just think that it just is a fundamental thing that if you want to get in the world, prove it. Just prove it. Like, do the work and stop talking and listening to podcasts and using fancy words. Like, you actually have to implement it and do it. So,
and it's not a super intensive thing. You know what I mean? Like, you got my wife's a CPA. It's not like you got to take 5 tests to get your CSCS. You know what I mean? It's it's one test. Like,
100%.
Go take it. It's not that hard. Study the book. Answer the you know, yeah, I don't know. But yeah, just one thing that I think is important for people to realize is sometimes because we have these different titles, we think there's a big difference in our jobs.
Yeah.
Right. But at the end of the day, you know, and I didn't come up with this phrase. Training is rehab, rehab is training. And I think the same can be said for testing. You know what I mean? Like if you're there and you're observing everything, whether it's rehab, whether it's training, whatever, you know, whatever that may be, sport practice, you should be assessing it all the time. So every day is a test, right? Every session is a test, so to speak, because you're there watching it. It's like, did it get better? Did the movement quality improve? Did the load increase? You know what I mean? Did the velocity change? All the whatever you're worrying about. But it doesn't have to be like, you know, oh, well, this is what the book says we should do. You know, it's good to know what the book says you should do, know the rules before you break them, so to speak. But, you know, understand that like a lot of the same basic principles as far as progression, progressive overload, volume, intensity, all that, that like I use, you guys use as well. It's just in a kind of a different way. So you don't have to like to use your example where like you've got the soccer kid, you're in a rural community, there's nobody else, and you're like, okay, yeah, we'll keep doing this rehab stuff, and then we're gonna do some like sport specific stuff. Like, think about the movement that you did in rehab. Well, what would be maybe the next step up? Right, and just kind of progress that type of a thing. And a lot of I feel like that would do more for them than continuing to do the rehab exercises. And then now we're doing some weird sport specific stuff, you know?
The hard part, Jamie, is that Instagram doesn't tell you to do that.
Well,
you know, Instagram shows you fancy exercises.
You know, the internet never lies.
It's my current battle. The young clinicians, the established clinicians, the veterans, the 10 years in, it's what's sexy. And from a strength conditioning standpoint, all you can do is shake your head, right? You're like, when would you insert that? When would that in any season, in off season, in season, when would you insert it? And how many reps? And what's the load on that? Because then ultimately, as rehab specialists, you're like, well, I'm just going to do it right now because I think the client's really going to like it, the patient's going to like it, the athlete's going to do great. But like, where does that fit along the triangle, and at what stage? And then like, how are you going to like deload this? Is there any ever load? I mean, what's the purpose behind it? And then what's the progressive overload on this? Like,
what came before, what's coming after, all that stuff.
And I think it's really hard. We are a week by week. To be truly transparent, we are a week by week profession, meaning typically, this is really bad to hear, we go week by week. You come in to see us, you have shoulder pain. Sounds good. Let's try that. Let's see how it goes next week. And then you come back and you're like, so how'd it go? And they're like, oh, it's worse. You're like, dang it. Let me retry this. Let's try it. Come back next week. Let me see how it goes. And you're like, there is no progression on this. And the biggest thing I learned from working with you and working with people like you is that you're like, I generally at least like map this out for the year. I have an idea. Yeah, I'll adapt. But as a medical profession, we don't think like that. We're never given the opportunity to think like that. Where you're like, okay, I have shoulder pain. Great. What's your next event? 3 weeks from now. Okay, let me work backwards. And then what do you have after that? Oh, I have something in 4 months. Great. Okay, so I'll buy some time here. So basically, I have a 3 week, 4 week gap that I need to be able to conquer. You need to be able to compete here. I need you to be able to train at week 3. I need some form of integration into sport week 2. So I basically have 1 week or 2 to get you out of pain. That's what you're telling me? Yes. That I can then build on exercise leading up to that, so I can progressively overload them and get them back to the sport and start working with their strength coach, telling their coach, hey, listen, they're only going to be back at week 2. I need 2 weeks of a gap where you're doing all lower body exercises, no upper body, don't touch them. Strength coach, do whatever you want. Safety bar, no hands behind the back, no, vertical lifts. And that helps the athlete more than, let me just see how it goes next week. Like, what do you think, coach? And they're like, what am I going to do? And the strength coach is like, what? So what are my green lights? What are my yellow lights? Like, what can I do? Like, I'm basically on an island. And so that's really what I really think, that we have never been able to think like that. So progressive, I like your feedback. I think that's huge. Basically apply the same principles on the rehab side and just can use upgrade them to the next level. Instead of trying to go skip a step and go to sport specific, just overload them on the rehab exercise, add some load, progressively overload their percentages, figure out whatever it is just to get them to the next level, find a resource that can take them and understands periodization and everything else a little bit more in depth than us. But we have a gap. We have this, we don't want to just let them go. So there's a gap that needs to be filled, and we would love to be in it. We're in a perfect position to be able to do that. We just don't have the knowledge or skill set to be able to take them to that next level. So people like you give us a better framework of what that feels like or should look like to be able to get them to that next step. So that helps for us. Just you being on the podcast and give us this framework really helps, because some of us are just getting a glimpse into what that looks like. Others who are already strength coaches are like, oh, it's good refinement. I would have turned the dial here and there. There's just a large gap. And ultimately, my vision is to get every sports PT thinking that they are a bridge versus you're a strength coach and you're a PT. Very hard to do. Very, very hard to do. If you figure it out, show me, tell me, because I haven't figured that out yet. You're just really good at one craft because you think one way, and to do both is very, very challenging. So I'm trying to get people to have really good strength in sports PT with the asset of being able to help support and bridge people into people like you, so that there's one person that wins, and that's the damn athlete.
That's right.
They are the most important on this planet. Don't you ever forget that in this podcast. This podcast doesn't exist without athletes that we serve.
Mm-hmm.
So, Jamie, I really, really appreciate you being on the podcast and taking your time and giving feedback for everybody else. So, Jamie Myers, out of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, strength coach extraordinaire. Extra wide and bulky. I like that. I like that. So, listeners, I hope you appreciated this podcast. And for whatever it is, if you're ever interested in learning more, I do have a strength summit that is geared towards sports PTs who have an interest in this, and that you want to learn the fundamentals and the foundations to be able to create a better pyramid, a better understanding of what it is to do to get onto that next bridge and help your athletes succeed. So if that's of interest to you, reach out to me at Dr. Chris at drchrisgarcia.com. And Jamie, we appreciate your time, and we will catch you guys on the next episode. Take care.